we are thrilled and honored to have with us Deborah Lipstadt. And Deborah, I just added you to the screen. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here and being with us. Deborah is the DeRote Professor of Modern Jewish History and Holocaust Studies at Emory University. She is, that's my daughter coming through. She is the author of several award-winning books, including Anti-Semitism Here and Now, a National Book Award winner, History on Trial, My Day in Court with David Irving, a National Jewish Book Award winner, Denying the Holocaust, Growing the Assault on Truth and Memory, and Beyond Belief. Lipstadt is frequently quoted in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Forward, Tablet. She regularly appears on BBC, CNN, NPR, and PBS, among many others. Deborah currently lives in Atlanta, and we are honored to be able to have you with us and for you to address alums for Campus Fairness on Anti-Semitism. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Deborah. So Deborah, please take it away.
Okay. Thank you all very much. It's really a pleasure being here. I enjoyed listening to Noah. I read the interview with her. I think it was in Variety. So I'm looking forward to getting the book. Do I get the book too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. In any case.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. In any case, I haven't heard the earlier speakers. I just came on. I listened to the interview with Noah. So forgive me if I am repeating some of the things that were said, but sometimes as a teacher, I find it's good to repeat because then listeners get reinforced, the information is reinforced in their mind, and or they feel really smart. Hey, I know that. So when we talk about anti-Semitism, I'm going to step back and instead of talking about issues, which I think you've been doing for a good part of this session, I want to give you a structural way of thinking about anti-Semitism. What is it? How do we understand it? Anti-Semitism is a prejudice, like other prejudices, like racism, homophobia, sexism, prejudge. I made up my mind. Don't confuse me with the facts. So that it's irrational. A prejudice, all prejudices are irrational. You assume everybody in the group is exactly the same. You assume there is no variation, and you don't have to know the person. I see the person either by the color of their skin, whether they're wearing a kippah, whether they've got tzitzis hanging out, whether they're wearing a Jewish star, which I've begun to wear in the past year because I didn't want to pass anymore. And then I assume I know who they are, and I know what they are, I know what they believe, and I know how they will behave. So in that sense, anti-Semitism is a prejudice like other prejudices. Now, how is it different? I think it has some distinct elements which bear extrapolating, because they're going to help you understand what it is you're fighting in whatever form it might come. So first of all, let's contrast anti-Semitism with, let's say, racism. Every prejudice, going back now talking about all prejudice, every prejudice has a template of stereotypes. You can't take one stereotype and put it on another group, even if you hate both groups, because it won't work. For instance, stereotypes about African-American, prejudicial stereotypes. I'm not talking about truth, I'm talking about prejudicial stereotypes. What are some of the prejudicial stereotypes? Well, the words that we often find used are shiftless, lazy, welfare, thugs, and other equally disturbing words, assuming everybody is like that, assuming that there are no other groups with people who are shiftless and lazy. That's the template of stereotypes associated with racism. What's the template of stereotypes associated with anti-Semitism? Well, I like to identify four, maybe others, but I think four major ones. First of all, something to do with money, with financial power. Jews are rich, Jews are controlling, Jews have financial abilities, etc., beyond what others have. A. B, smarts, but not smart. You say, oh, that person is really smart. When you're talking about, when you're using it within the context of the anti-Semitic stereotype, you're not talking affirmatively. You're saying things like clever, conniving, crafty. I always say there may be something about the hard C sound, but in other words, smarts that they use in a malicious fashion for their own advancement, for their own good. And not only for their own good, but crafty, for their own good and to everybody else's detriment. They are not only looking only for themselves, it's ironic, it may not neely mealy, but the other half, if I'm only for myself, what am I? But if I'm not for myself, it may not neely who's going to be for me. But the other half is, if I'm only for myself, what am I? But that doesn't matter. They assume that all Jews are only for themselves and for other Jews, and they are working to hurt others. The third stereotype, or the third part of that template, the third element I would add, and they all relate one to the other, is what I call punching above their weight. Small in number, but able to accomplish things which sort of belie the smallness of the few that they are. Think back to one of the most all-enduring anti-Semitic phony. I mean, it's a phony book. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which purports to be, it is not, purports to be the deliberations, the protocols, the minutes of meetings of elders of Zion, a small group, remember, small in number, sitting around deciding how they're going to control the world's economy. The truth of the matter is, a little historical background. That book appeared in, I think, the 1860s, 70s initially, had nothing to do with Jews. Nothing to do with Jews. Was taken probably by the Tsarist police towards the end of the 19th century. Jews were put into it, injected, add Jews as evil, and then it became the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But in other words, so they're small in number, but they're able to punch above their weight. That, by the way, is one of the reasons why when involved Jews, and Jews who were aware of these stereotypes and aware of these ways in which they used against Jews, hear terms like the Israel lobby, the Zionist lobby, the Jewish lobby, we react, and we get our hackles on. We react. We're bothered by it in a way that people who grow tobacco may not react when they hear about the tobacco lobby, or people who make steel may not react when they hear about the steel lobby, because we know that the implication is, oh, those Jews, small in number, but bring 6,000 Jews to an AIPAC meeting, they're going to turn this whole country upside down, turn this whole city upside down, turn this whole Congress and White House upside down to their own interests. And the final element of this template of anti-Semitism that I would add is the Jew as devil. Now, what do I mean by that? That sounds sort of murky and whatever. Remember that anti-Semitism has its roots in Christian theology. I'm not saying all Christians are anti-Semites. I'm not saying all Christian theology had to be anti-Semitic, but it was used that way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the devil in Christian theology had two characteristics. One, the devil was the only one who could harm God, and know that in the New Testament, is essentially a conversation amongst Jews. Everybody in the book is Jewish except for the Romans who actually killed Jesus. But it's used later by Rome as a way of furthering Christianity and inculcating hatred towards those who remain Jews. But in any case, the devil can harm very powerful beings, A. And B, the other characteristic of the devil is the devil does his work in disguise. You don't know you've been attacked by the devil till the devil has come and gone. Now, some of you may be sitting here thinking, why is she talking about the devil? Because you, even today, as anti-Semitism moved out of a theological framework and moved into secular circles and moved into anti-religious circles, not just secular, but Haredi, atheist circles, of fundamental haters of religion, Karl Marx, it took those stereotypes with them, cleaned them, denuded them of religious elements. So killing of Jesus had nothing to do one thing or the other, but left financial, Rothschilds controlled the banks, left craftiness of Jews, left punching above their weight, and left the devil element too. Today, sometimes you'll hear the term the name George Soros thrown about. I don't care what you think about George Soros, his politics, his money. When his name is used in a political way, in this kind of way, it is a code for Jews. And they're working behind the scenes. They're doing this behind the scenes. So that's, and I'm going to get to more of that in a minute. So that's the template of anti-Semitic charges. Now I want to go back to working within the construct of prejudice in general, and especially doing this contrast. So let's say again, let's go back to this contrast because it's so much in the news today of anti-Semitism with racism. As I say, they're both prejudices. I started by making that point, but there's something significantly different and unique about anti-Semitism as compared to other prejudices. When you're talking about racism, the racist, and usually the racist and the anti-Semite are one and the same. The racist looks at the person of color, Black person, brown person, and says, they're not as smart as I am. They're not as capable as I am. They're not as accomplished as I am. If they move into our neighborhood, there goes the neighborhood. If their kids go to our kids' school, there goes the school. In other words, the racist punches down. But when they deal with Jews, it flips around. They loathe the person of color, the racist loathe. And the racist, as I say, and the anti-Semite are generally one and the same. But when they look at Jews, they say, aha, the Jew is richer than, smarter than, more powerful than I am. More able to work in subterranean and subterfuge, etc. The Jew, I not only loathe the Jew, but I fear the Jew for what they might do to me. So the anti-Semite punches up. Okay, so you've got punching down, punching up, and that makes a very big difference. So that's one distinctive element about anti-Semitism. The other distinctive element, and it's very relevant to today, is, and it's implicit in the stereotypes that I was giving to you a moment ago, is the conspiracy. That Jews are involved in this conspiracy. Remember, planning, conniving, protocols of the elders of Zion. They're involved in a conspiracy to harm the non-Jew and advance themselves. They are a conspiratorial group. Now, generally, most anti-Semitic charges, whether it's in the Middle Ages, the poisoning of the wells, or it's the bubonic plague, or it's the Great Fire in London, whatever it might be, you had, very often it was the Jew who was behind it, because you already had a centuries-old animosity towards the Jew, so it was very easy to plug the Jew right in. Today, we have something new, where conspiracy theories abound all over. I mean, there's been so much written about them, whether it's QAnon or whatever one is addicted to on the internet. And the person who is attracted to conspiracy theories and beguiled by conspiracy theories then looks, well, who could be behind this? Who could be doing this? Well, there's one group that for millennia, since the beginning of the Common Era, for over 2,000 years, has been involved in conspiracy, whether 2,000 years ago it was trying to kill Jesus, whether 600 years ago it was trying to spread the bubonic plague, whether it was trying to burn down London, whether it was trying to get control of the banks, whatever it might be, trying to create a communist revolution to take over the world. Who is that group? The Jews. So in other words, Not every conspiracy theorist will go to the Jews, but many will, even if they don't start out looking for the Jews, because it's such a convenient target to plug right in. Of course, the charges are absurd and make no sense, but it's very hard. This is one of the reasons why it is so hard to fight anti-Semitism. Because how do you fight something that's absurd? How do you fight something that's illogical? How do you fight something that's delusional? Think about the charges. Jews are all communists. They're all lefties. They want to take over the society and bring in communism, socialism, whatever it is they want to do. Jews are all capitalists. They want to control the banks. Jews are pushy. They're always trying to get into clubs they don't belong to, fraternities they don't belong with, that don't want them, dorms that don't want the Jew, et cetera, neighborhoods that don't want Jews. Or Jews are clannish. They stick together. They're not interested in mixing it up with other people. Well, last time I checked, it's impossible to be a communist and a capitalist, clannish and pushy at the same time. It's contradictory, but that doesn't matter to the anti-Semite. It's part and parcel. The point I want to make next, and I'm not sure, are we gonna have time for questions? Should I allow some time for questions, or are we just doing this?
Yeah, we have some time for a couple of questions, but you can still continue right now.
Yeah, I've got more to say. I could go,
Good.
So recently I was talking to my class, and one of the students says, Professor Lipstadt, you're muted. I said, that doesn't happen very often, It's not usually one of my problems. So think back to Charlottesville. Think back to that awful weekend in August 3 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. Remember the rally? You've seen the videos. You can go online and see them. When these guys who've come for a Unite the Right rally. This was a unique rally. This wasn't just a rally of far right white supremacist white nationalists. This was to bring together under one umbrella all these different groups. And there were two things that these two groups shared: a deep-seated racism and a deep-seated anti-Semitism. And they weren't two coterminous things, they're linked together. So remember the rally on Friday night? Some of us watched it live, some of us watched it afterwards when it was broadcast. When they're marching across the campus of the University of Virginia with the tiki torches, what are they chanting? Anybody remember what they're chanting? They're chanting, "Jews will not replace us." What did they mean by that? Well, on the far right, we have anti-Semitism on the right, we have anti-Semitism on the left. On the far right, I'm using the terms white supremacist, white nationalist, white power interchangeably, even though they are somewhat different. But I think for the sake of our conversation tonight, I'm going to use them interchangeably. I acknowledge that. What were they saying by Jews? What did they mean by that? Well, on the far right, there is a theory called, it's called by different names: white genocide replacement theory, white genocide theory, white Christian genocide theory. And basically it dates back, some people have dated it back to more recent years, to France, but the truth is it really dates back to a book by a guy named William Pierce called the Turner Diaries. And it was written, he wrote it in the 70s. And he was an overt, blazing anti-Semite and blazing racist. And he looked out on the world and he saw the civil rights legislation that had passed, and advancements, structural advancements and other things being achieved by people of color in this country. And he said, now remember my punch down, punch up differentiation. He said, Blacks are achieving a lot. They're making a lot of headways. They're not smart enough. They're not talented enough to be able to be doing this on their own. There has to be someone behind the scenes manipulating this, helping them achieve this. They are the puppets. There has to be a puppeteer manipulating them for the puppeteer's own advantage. In other words, the puppeteer doesn't care about Black people and their advantage, but the puppeteer is using this because they have a secret objective, which they are trying to achieve. They are involved in a conspiracy against whom? Against Christianity and against white people, because they're not really white. So when they were chanting, Jews will not replace us, this was where their racism and their anti-Semitism came one and the same. And even when you saw the same theory when a couple of years ago, and it's been off and on, and this country continues, you saw an influx into Europe of refugees, immigrants, call it what you may, from Africa, from North Africa, from the Middle East. And people talk swarms, hordes, whatever words they use. But there too, they said, oh, these people, they're not talented enough. They're not smart enough to be able to come into Europe like that. There's somebody manipulating it. And that's where you often heard the name George Soros. That George Soros is like the Rothschild of the 21st century. So that they're trying to do this. So that's what we see on the far right. What we see on the far left, and I know I was talking about it to some degree, is often the anti-Semitism parading as an interest in Israel, a criticism of Israel. And as we all know, and I think Noah would probably agree with me, criticism of Israeli policies is not anti-Semitism. You want to hear criticism of Israeli policies? Go sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv, or better yet, go to Jerusalem to the Knesset. And it's the only democracy in the Middle East. You'll hear one party criticizing the policies of another party. You'll hear it, and you have to listen very hard. They're yelling, they're screaming, and they're talking Israel. They're talking in Hebrew at a mile a minute. My Hebrew is pretty good. I need someone translating for me because it's just, you can't even keep up with it. But when you get a singling out of Israel to the isolation of all other groups, Israel's the only one responsible. Israel's the only wrongdoer in the entire world, much less in the entire Middle East. I was once, not long ago, I write about this in my book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, which I also wrote in many ways for young people. It's written as a series of letters, a conversation between me and a student and a colleague. So it's very campus oriented. But I write about this incident of having been in a town. I was in a university town for a conference. I was free in the evening. I was staying near the campus. I saw there was going to be a lecture on Israel. I said, this will be interesting. Maybe I'll go listen to it. And I came, and of course, it was not surprisingly, sadly, it was a virulently anti-Israel lecture. And afterwards, people were standing around in the anteroom. In the antechamber outside, entry hall, and I didn't know anybody, so I was going to leave pretty soon after I got there. But I walked past, and people were chatting one with the other. Somebody said, well, Israel was founded on a evil, and therefore doesn't have a right to exist. So my ears perked up, and nobody knew who I was. And I said, oh, what do you mean by that? I don't understand. He said, well, they came and they threw out all the Palestinians who lived there. They displaced them. There was an indigenous people there, and they got rid of them. And therefore, it has no right to exist. So I said, oh, I'm a historian. I study history. So I want to set your statement in a broader context. Let's assume that's correct. It's not entirely correct, and Noah was making that point earlier. But let's assume that's correct. I said, let's think of other countries that maybe have a similar charge in their founding history. And let's start with the United States of America and the treatment of indigenous people here, or slavery. Or let's talk about Canada and the treatment of what Canadians call the First Nation, which people talk about the horrific treatment there. Or let's talk about Australia and the treatment of the Aborigines. Or let's talk about New Zealand and the treatment of the Maoris. I didn't say China and the treatment of the Ungars, the Muslims, or Myanmar and the treatment of the Rohingya. I wanted to talk about countries with which people in the Western world sort of identify and look upon as bastions of liberal democratic values. I said, oh, let's look most of all at the British Empire, where they went into every country and sometimes enslaved and sometimes just took over the indigenous people. Do those countries not have a right to exist? In other words, you can be critical of, and every country has things that you can be critical. I can be critical of Guantanamo or whatever. I can be critical of certain policy, and it doesn't make me anti-American. But to single out Israel in this way, I say, I got to ask why you're doing it. I got to ask why you make this one choice to the exception of all the others. So let me just get one thing about anti-Semitism on the left. I sort of meandered into discussion of Israel, but we've got the white replacement, white Christian genocide theory on the right. What do we have on the left? On the left, we have something a little different. The same template of charges: money, power, conniving, and applied directly to Israel. Israel working behind the scenes, controlling who's ever in the White House or whatever it might be. But on the left, the theory works a little differently. On the left, the Jew is considered white, whereas on the far, far right, the Jew is not considered white. I'm talking about extremes now. I'm not talking about center and different basic accepted differences of approaches. So there, the Jew is considered white. The Jew is considered privileged. All Jews are rich. Remember my template of stereotypes. The Jew is considered powerful. Ipso facto, says the person on the far right. You know, we saw this very clearly. We saw this in the British Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. If the Jew is white, and if the Jew is wealthy, and if the Jew is privileged, ipso facto, they can't be victims of prejudice. It's impossible. A victim of prejudice is not someone who is wealthy and not someone who is privileged and not someone who is white. And, says the person on the far left, the added element, and I call this the Miss Piggy defense, and they say, and moi, me, remember Miss Piggy, moi, me, I am a liberal. I was raised on liberal values. I imbibed liberal values with my mother's milk. It's impossible for me to be prejudiced. Therefore, if you, Jew, can't be a victim, and I, person of the far left, can't be a perpetrator of prejudice, therefore, the anti-Semitism you're talking about doesn't exist. You're making this up. You're making this up with another objective: to cover up for the sins of Israel, to cover up for the wrongs of Jews, whatever it might be, whatever charge you make. So that's what we have on the far left, and that's what we have on the far right. It comes from both directions. And I, for one, am an equal opportunity critic. I have friends on the right, I have friends on the left. My friends on the right very astutely can identify, and correctly, absolutely 110% correctly, identify anti-Semitism on the left, and they're spot on. I have friends on the left who very astutely can identify anti-Semitism on the right. What they don't do is identify the anti-Semitism in the camp in which they are located themselves, in the group with which they identify on other issues, and the group with which they have the most street cred, if you still say that, the street credibility. When people do that, when someone on the left can only see anti-Semitism right, doesn't see it right next to them, and vice versa, that when I say, you're not interested in fighting anti-Semitism, you're interested in making political advances for your own sides. I am going to fight it no matter where I see it, who it's coming from my good friend who's going to make an anti-Semitic crack, or someone with whom I disagree 150% on every policy thing. And I think that's how we have to behave. It can't be a smokescreen for achieving other political goals. It's got to be a fight against Jew hatred. The final point I want to make is we did achieve a small, very small, slight, but when you're in this business, you like even small victories this week. One is that the AP, the Associated Press, and any of you who are campus editors or were editors or even in business and law firms and corporations, you know that the AP style sheet is the Torah for copy editors. If they don't know whether are we capitalizing Black or lowercase, are we capitalizing communism or lowercase, capital, etc., you look in the AP style sheet and that always gives you cover. You say, we're going according to the AP style sheet. Once they change, we change. So exactly a little less than a week ago, the AP style sheet announced that it was changing something for which I've been battling a long time. They didn't do it simply because of me, but it was something that I was part of a megaphone of a lot of people saying this. They dropped the hyphen from anti-Semitism, as I think you do as well. Because with the hyphen, it looks like you're against something called Semitism. There is no such thing called Semitism. There are people who speak Semitic languages. That's true. That's like the people who speak Romance languages, people who speak Slavic languages. But there's no such thing as Semites. You put a Jew from Ethiopia and a Jew from Russia and a Jew from Harbin and a Jew from New York together. They're all Jews. They look entirely different. There's no such thing as a Semitic people. But with the hyphen, what often happened is you had people who would say, well, I'm a Semite. I'm from the Middle East. I'm a Semite. So anti-Semitism should also be about hatred of people from, speak of Arabs or Palestinians. And it's not. The word in its origins, invented in Vienna in the 19th century, meant Jew hatred. When it was originally written, I have this in my book, it was written as one word, anti-Semitismus. When the guy's article, Wilhelm Marr, he was a journalist, when his articles were translated into English, I guess it was some printer. They used to set type, that's what we call typeface, typesetting, was setting the type, and he saw this word in German. And when it was being translated into English, he put it in a hyphen because it was anti-Semitism. You can be immigration, you can be anti-taxation, you can be even anti-vaccination, though I don't know why anybody in their right mind would be, but that's for another conversation. But the thing on the other side of the hyphen stands alone. This is not, anti-Semitism does not mean against being Semitism. It means one thing and one thing only: hating Jews because they are Jews. So AP got rid of the hyphen, and then another thing that I've been arguing for, they're going to spell it with a lowercase. And my argument is, I don't know what their rationale was. My argument is anything that is so delusional, is so absurd, and has caused such damage to so many people and continues to cause such damage doesn't deserve an uppercase letter. So on that small matter, we achieved a victory, and we achieved a relative victory. And with this, I'll close, in the President of the United States recognizing the Armenian genocide. Hitler is purported to have said in 1939, when he was beginning to think about the idea of a genocide against the Jews, of the possibility of a genocide against the Jews, who today speaks of the Armenians? No one. This was the Armenian genocide, less than 3 decades before, 24 years before. Who knows of it? Who speaks of it? In other words, we'll do this to the Jews. Who's going to remember? Who's going to speak about it? Who's going to be upset by it? So, and if you want to know what was the prototype for Holocaust denial, look at Turkish genocide denial. So those two things. Now, some people, as I wrote in the forwards just yesterday, some people may dismiss them. It's a matter of words, a style sheet. We know it was a genocide, calling it genocide, but and this is a message I want you to take away, if anything you take away from this talk this evening, there is no genocide that didn't begin with words. Words of hate need not necessarily lead to a genocide, but think about it. The Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, Rwanda genocide, Sarajevo, Srebrenica, they all began with words. Words count. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Deborah. That was very powerful, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. We have a few minutes, and if I may, I wanted to ask you directly about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, International Holocaust Remembrance Association. It's something that we've advocated for on campuses for like universities to do it. I've even heard of Rachel Fish, who spoke with us earlier. She was working with football teams to even adopt it. And I think it's, former player in the Miami Heat said a derogatory term while he was playing video games. He then got cut by the Heat. He then got traded by the Heat to the Thunder, and then they cut him. So obviously words matter, to your point. But I think even more important is defining it, and something that that we've endorsed. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah. First of all, that player, but then something very wonderful happened with that player. I'm blocking
Correct.
his name, and I'm sure half of you, your entire audience is yelling who his name is at the screen.
Myers Leonard.
There you go. Right. Some people reached out to him and began to educate him and talk about, hey, you know why he's using the word, he used the kite, the K word, or whatever you want to call it. And they began to explain why that's wrong. And apparently he understood. And there were various rabbis, the Chabad rabbi, other rabbis, Federation, I don't know, different groups reached out to him. And the last thing I saw about him was a picture of him. This was around Purim time. I think it was delivering Shalach Manot in the Miami area. So sometimes we educate, sometimes we cancel, but sometimes we try to educate. And there was an example of education, I think, working very, very well. In terms of the definition, this is a definition that was created in, I think, 2004-05 in the wake of the Durban Conference, which was just the sort of debut on the world of the most vociferous anti-Israel, anti-Semitic harangues, propaganda attacks that we have seen. I know people from all political stripes who were there, Jews who were just in utter shock about it. And one of the reasons we didn't hear more about it is that it happened the same time as 9/11. In the wake of that, people who work in this area from many different places in the world put together this definition, this IRA definition. It was compiled in the United States. It wasn't written by one person. It was a compilation. And it has great emphasis on aspects of criticism of Israel, which can become anti-Semitic. Now, as I said, it's not ipso facto criticism is anti-Semitic, but they can become, as you've, I'm sure, heard tonight and during the day and during this meeting. And it placed great emphasis there. It also talks about anti-Semitism from the right, but most of the focus is on the Israel piece of it. And it's very clear that those different aspects of it say this can be part of it, need not always, but it gives examples. These are examples that can be part of it. It has, over the past, I guess, of 2005, past 15 years, been adopted by countries, soccer teams, football teams. If I was in England, I'd say football teams. Rachel's maybe working on football teams, given her connection with the Patriots, et cetera, or with Bob Kraft. It's been adopted by the Holocaust Museum. It's been adopted by countries. At this point, to say we're suddenly going to come up with a new definition, I don't think makes sense and is really efficacious. The debate is whether it should be adopted into law and what that means. To put it, enshrine it into absolute law is, of course, problematic because we do have that pesky thing in this country called the First Amendment. But I think that it is a valuable working definition. It's a working definition. It's not enshrined inside. It's to give administrators. Look, one of the problems we have on campus, and I'll finish my answer, a long answer, but as I say, I've drawn on. This goes back to where I began, and maybe it's a good point to bring it together, Avi, in the sense that often when Jewish kids show up in campus in the whatever provost office or dean's office who is delegated to handle, racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, whatever attacks, misogynist attacks on campus, by and large, Jewish kids don't present as other kids who are victims of prejudice. Remember, punching up, they look comfortable, come from parents who are comfortable, not the first ones in their family to go to campus, etc., to go to attend college or whatever. The point to understand is that anti-Semitism has it's a prejudice, but with its unique aspects. The Jews, now I don't easily draw analogies, and I'm not analogizing here, but we do learn from history. The Jews in Germany, most of them solidly middle class, some upper class, comfortable. If you had said to them in 1931 what was going to be by 1935 when they wouldn't be citizens anymore, they would have thought you were crazy. I'm not saying we're going towards the same way at all, and anybody who would say that I said that, you're wrong. I'll deny it, and I know something about denial. But words matter. Words count. Words can be very powerful. Be careful of your words and listen to the words that others use.
Thank you, Deborah. 100%. I agree, and I wanted to thank you for sharing that. And something I said in one of our breakout rooms is that it's another tool in the toolbox for Jewish students to be able to use when something is more defined clearly for an administration. It's easier to then help find a solution for it. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Words do matter. It's something that's important for all of us. And I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We're out of time, but thank you for sharing with us your wisdom. It was incredibly enlightening, I think, for everyone, certainly for me. I don't know about anyone else.
Well, if you learned something, that's a good thing, because you deal with this all the time. I'm not pushing my own book. You can take it out of the library. You can borrow it from a friend. But the book is written, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, was written just like Noah. It was written for college students. It was written because these are the questions I've been asked by my students. So it might be helpful to you. Don't worry about it. I'm not pushing it, but if you're looking for something that's a guidance, it might be a helpful tool.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Deborah, and thank you
My pleasure. I wish you all well. Have a good summer. Happy Lag BaOmer. And be careful when you burn those, make those fires. And not so long, Chag Sameach for Shavuot, and have a good summer. Thank you all for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Deborah.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.